In this family, I raised everyone. I held their hands when they were too small to walk, sat by their beds when they were sick, and trembled quietly with every step they took as they grew. I taught them how to tie their shoes, how to read bedtime stories, how to say thank you even when they didn't want to. And now, when I simply said I'd like to come with them, just once, to see the world not through photo albums or travel magnets, Iris smiled, that polite, pitying smile she has when she thinks I've forgotten my place. "You're too old, Nana Irene," she said. "It's a long trip. Besides, someone has to look after the house." Then she patted my shoulder, like I was some old chair with a creaky leg, and told me to remember to double lock the back door. Noah, my son, chimed in helpfully that I should water the ferns twice a week. They spoke to me like I was the housekeeper. Someone trustworthy enough to be left behind, but not enough to be invited along. The morning after they left, I opened the mailbox and there they were. 4 plane tickets. Still in the white envelope from the travel agency. No stamp, no postmark. They had dropped them off themselves. I stood at the mailbox a long time, just holding that envelope like it might suddenly vanish. Departure, 3 days from now. Destination, Athens. 2 adults. 2 children. Seats together. My name wasn't there. Of course, it wasn't. I brought the tickets inside and placed them gently on the kitchen table. Then I made a cup of Earl Grey, what you do when something hits you square in the chest at my age. You make tea and wait for your hands to stop shaking. But they didn't stop. Not right away. They were still trembling when I reached for the old address book I kept in the drawer with the birthday candles. I found the number for the travel agency. My voice didn't crack. "I'd like to cancel 4 plane tickets," I said. A pause. Then a cautious voice. "May I ask why, ma'am?" "No," I said. "Just cancel them." She did. I wrote down the confirmation number on the back of a grocery list. Then I made another cup of tea. I sat in the blue armchair by the window, the one I used to rock Noah to sleep in when he was small enough to fit in my arms. I stared around the living room. Nothing had changed. And everything had. The photo of my late husband, Harold, still sat above the mantel, still smiling like he was in on a joke I hadn't heard. 20 years gone. I missed his hands most of all. He would have said something. He would have stopped them. I'd been many things in this house, a wife, a nurse, a secretary, a cook, a fixer of broken toys and broken hearts. But for the past decade? Just Nana. Not Irene. Not Mom. Just background noise. Trusted, yes. But faded. They thought I'd sit quietly and wait for sun-drenched selfies from Santorini. Little blue hearts in the family chat. "Wish you were here, Nana." Knowing full well they never wished it. I looked again at the cancelled tickets. Then I opened the bottom drawer in the cabinet where I kept my passport. It was still valid. I checked. Twice. $12,000 in savings. A few bonds. No debts. No one depending on me anymore. I booked a flight. To Athens. 1 seat. Aisle. Near the back. Next, I called my neighbor, Carla. "Could you water the plants for me while I'm away?" "Of course, sweetie." "Going somewhere?" "Just a little trip." I packed a single suitcase. Good walking shoes. My favorite scarf. And that navy blue dress I hadn't worn since Harold's funeral. Not because it made me sad, but because it made me feel elegant. And I had forgotten how that felt. That night, I sat on the porch swing. The ivy rustled in the breeze. The street was quiet. I wondered what they'd say when they found out. Maybe they'd call. Maybe not. I didn't care. The morning was cool. I locked the door. Left a note for Carla with watering instructions and the name of my hotel. Walked slowly down the front steps. One hand on the handle of my suitcase, the other holding my boarding pass like a shield. I hadn't flown in almost 30 years. The airport smelled like metal and movement. Too much glass. Too many signs. Too many people in a rush to leave things behind. But I moved through it like I belonged there. That's half of it, you know. Acting like you belong. You learn that after years of fading into the wallpaper. On the plane, I had an aisle seat. I sat still, hands in my lap, while the young people stuffed their oversized bags into the bins. The seat beside me stayed empty until the last minute. Then a man in his 30s, gold ring on his finger, soft eyes, slid in with a sigh. "Long flight?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. He smiled. And then, thankfully, left me alone. I slept through most of it. Not a deep sleep, but the kind that keeps grief from boiling over into rage. When I woke, we were over the Mediterranean. And it hit me. I'd actually done it. The air in Athens felt heavier than home. Not unpleasant, just different, thick with something old and unhurried. I moved through the airport slowly, with purpose. No one waited for me on the other side, and that fact felt oddly freeing. I didn't have to smile for anyone, didn't need to pretend to be delighted or grateful for being included. I hailed a taxi to a small guest house I'd booked online the night before. It wasn't much, clean, quiet, tucked behind a side street shaded by olive trees and forgotten balconies. The woman behind the counter called me madam in a soft Greek accent. I smiled at her more than I usually smile at strangers. She gave me a real key, not a card, and that too felt important. Heavy. Tangible. Mine. The room smelled of soap and sun. A small window let in the early evening light. I placed my suitcase by the wall and sat on the bed. Not for a nap, I wasn't tired yet. I just sat there for a long while, looking at the floor tiles. Pale blue, with tiny cracks. Like veins. Like lifelines. I didn't cry. I didn't feel like I needed to. Sadness wasn't in the front seat anymore, something else had taken over. Maybe a strange kind of clarity. Maybe nothing at all. I changed into the navy blue dress I brought. I had bought it 2 decades ago for Paul's funeral and hadn't worn it since. Not because of grief, but because it reminded me of a version of myself that had once chosen how to present herself to the world. That dress made me look good. Strong. The kind of woman who knew things. The kind I hadn't seen in the mirror in a very long time. I walked that first evening. Just a few blocks. A sleepy stretch of street where storefronts shimmered with reflected light, and scooters hummed like dragonflies past shuttered apartments. I found a little bakery and ordered bread and olives. No rush, no glances at a clock. The waiter didn't try to move me along. I ate slowly, not checking my phone once. Who would I text? They weren't expecting updates. They had made that very clear. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. That light, the way it spilled in through the shutters, was different than any morning light I had ever seen. It was soft but not weak. It entered the room like it belonged there, not as an invader but as an old friend. I opened the shutters wide and stood there barefoot, letting the sounds of birds and mopeds and distant church bells greet me. Downstairs, the same woman from check-in greeted me with a warm calamera. I asked, almost shyly, "Do you have any suggestions?" But not tourist spots. Somewhere quiet. She smiled in that way that makes you feel like you've passed a small test. Anaphiotica, she said, writing the name down. It's very old. Peaceful. Go early. No crowds. So I did. I took her handwritten note, folded it into my purse, and walked. Anaphiotica was not like the brochures. There were no glossy signs or tour groups with name badges. It felt like someone had draped a village across the shoulder of a hill and told no one. Whitewashed homes, blue shutters, tiny courtyards with bougainvillea and cats asleep in doorways. The air smelled of dust and something citrusy. It didn't feel like a place, it felt like a secret. I walked for a long time. Farther than I should have. My feet ached, my hips protested, but I didn't stop until I found a stone bench beneath a fig tree. And there I sat. Not waiting for anything. Just being. Couples passed me now and then, young and loud and sun-kissed. Nobody noticed me. No one asked what I was doing there. I wasn't an old woman watching the house. I was just another person, sitting in the sun. That's when I thought of Noelle, my granddaughter. I imagined what she'd say if she saw me there. Probably laugh. maybe roll her eyes. She had a dramatic streak I secretly loved. I reached into my bag and pulled out the postcard I'd bought the day before, just in case. I hadn't planned to write anything. But my hands moved before my thoughts did. Dear Noelle. Guess where I am? Greece. The sea is even bluer than you'd imagine. I hope you're well. Love. Grandma. I didn't write to my son. Or his wife. They didn't need to know. That postcard wasn't for them. There was a mailbox near the cafe I stopped at next. I dropped the card in, then sat at a table facing the street. I ordered a coffee, strong and dark, and sipped it slowly, like my mother used to when mornings were quiet and nobody needed her for a while. That night, back in my room, I noticed I was humming. A tune I hadn't thought about in years. Paul used to sing it while shaving. Funny how grief lets go of you slowly, like a tide pulling back. I wasn't young. I wasn't especially brave. But I was somewhere I wanted to be. That mattered. That counted. I hadn't come here to meet people. That wasn't the point. But life has its own sense of timing. And it doesn't ask for permission before it starts something. It was 2 days after I arrived in Athens, over breakfast. I was sitting by the window, buttering toast far too carefully, when I heard a voice from the next table. "You're using too much butter." Not cruelly. Just, plainly. I looked up, amused more than offended. "Better too much than too little," I replied. She nodded. True. That was the beginning. Her name was Rosalie. Retired headmistress. Widowed, like me. She wore her hair in a messy knot and her glasses low on her nose. Her eyes were sharp, even through the haze of age. She traveled alone. A Leo, she informed me without irony, as if that said enough. She had that flinty confidence some women carry like good perfume, not loud, just unquestionably present. We started walking together. Nothing far. Just quiet morning walks through back streets, markets, plazas not in any guidebooks. I liked the way she noticed things, not postcard sites, but textures. Broken shutters painted lilac. A cat sleeping by a fountain. A boy picking oranges without asking. She didn't take pictures. She just looked. Really looked. Over lunch, under a terrace covered in grapevines, she told me about her old students. The troublemakers were always her favorites, she admitted. I told her about my garden, how the tomatoes never quite cooperated no matter how sweetly I spoke to them. "And your family?" she asked gently. I paused. "They're fine," I said. "Just thought I was too old to travel." She narrowed her eyes. "They told you that?" I nodded. She didn't react dramatically. She just sipped her wine. "Well, you're here," she said. "So they were wrong." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about all the years I stayed in my lane. All the birthdays I hosted but never sat down to enjoy. All the trips I paid for but wasn't invited on. How many times had I told myself, "They're just busy. You're needed here." But I wasn't needed. Not really. Not beyond caretaking, cooking, quiet usefulness. A fixture, not a person. The next morning, Rosalie knocked on my door with a folded map and a glint in her eye. "Florence," she said. "It's not far. I've always wanted to see the Uffizi." "You?" I blinked. "Why not?" she asked. We booked train tickets that day. 2 women over 70 buying one-way seats like college girls on summer break. We laughed about it over dinner, though something in me still felt tight. Like a muscle not used in years, stretching for the first time. That evening, I received a message from my daughter-in-law. The first in weeks. "Hey, have you checked on the garden lately? The irrigation system's acting up." "No, how are you?" "No, where are you?" "No, we miss you." "Just the plants." I didn't reply. We left Athens on a morning train. Not a plane, a train. With ferries, transfers, confusing stations where time felt like a suggestion rather than a rule. And still, I wasn't anxious. Me, Eleanor Grant, the woman who made lists, who timed everything to the minute, who packed emergency kits, was traveling to Italy with no hotel booked, no itinerary, no map. Nina and I barely spoke. It wasn't a tense silence, it was natural. Easy. We were past the stage of proving ourselves with words. On the ferry, we stood at the railing, watching the sea foam in our wake. She smoked slowly, like it was a ceremony. I just held onto the metal bar, feeling oddly light. None of my students would believe this, she said, exhaling. The class nerd running off to Italy with a woman she met 3 days ago. My family would think I was kidnapped, I replied. Or lost my mind. She looked at me, squinting through the sunlight. Haven't you? Maybe, I said, and smiled. And I kind of like it. We arrived in Florence in the early morning, exhausted, but buzzing with something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. The stone streets, the hum of scooters, the smell of espresso, it was all too much and exactly enough. The world was louder, warmer, more alive. Or maybe I was finally paying attention. We found a hotel almost by accident. A faded building with wooden shutters and a view over terracotta rooftops. The stairs creaked like old bones, but the room was clean, the windows opened wide, and from the bed we could hear the bells of the nearby square. We rested for an hour, then set out to find the Uffizi Gallery. Not because it was on a checklist, we had no checklist, but simply because we wanted to go. That was the only reason we needed. We walked slowly. Stopped for coffee at a corner cafe. Watched tourists fuss with maps and locals wave their arms in long, dramatic conversations. A violinist played near a fountain. It was cliché, yes, but still moving. I imagined the old version of me saying, "You see this in every movie." But I didn't say it. I just stood there and listened. At the Uffizi, we spent hours. I didn't try to remember what I knew about the paintings. I didn't explain or interpret. I just stood and let color sink into me. Nina leaned close to the canvases, examining the cracks, the eyes of Madonnas and martyrs. She whispered only once. "Still alive. This still breathes." That evening, we ate dinner at a small restaurant by the Arno. The wine was a bit sour, the pizza slightly burnt, but the bread was incredible. We laughed. Really laughed. "Are you sad?" she asked, suddenly. "Not even a little," I said. And for the first time in years, it was true. After dinner, we walked along the river. The lights reflected in the water like something from a dream. The bridge over the Arno looked like it belonged in a painting, not in real life. "I don't want to go back to the house," I said. "I never did," Nina answered. But women like us take years to say it out loud. We stayed in Florence for 4 days. We watched street painters, napped in shady parks, talked about nothing in particular, and inside that nothing, there was so much. I didn't check my phone. Only one message came through, from my son. "Everything okay? We thought you'd be home by now." I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what to say. Or if I wanted to say anything at all. For the first time, I realized silence was also an answer. On the 5th morning, we woke up late. The sun was already too hot. I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the market unfold below. People laughing, haggling, picking out peaches. Life happening. Without me. And it was fine. Nina stepped out, barefoot and wrapped in a robe. "So," she said, stretching. "Venice next?" I laughed. But inside, I'd already said yes. The train to Venice was crowded, humid, and smelled faintly of old leather and espresso. Nina slept most of the way, her head against the window, one hand loosely curled in her lap like she was dreaming of something she didn't want to tell me about. I didn't sleep. I watched the fields blur past, golden and green and impossible to hold on to. Everything felt temporary in the best way, like sand slipping through fingers that finally stopped clenching. Venice appeared like a hallucination. One moment, land. The next, water. Then silence. As if the city knew how to hush even the loudest parts of your mind. From the train station, we stepped onto a vaporetto. Nina, who had never shown fear in Athens or Florence, gripped the rail tightly as the boat turned. "I don't like boats," she said. "I thought you didn't like tourists either," I replied. "I like you," she said simply. And that was the end of it. Venice was unreal. All gold light and crumbling walls, alleyways that seemed to rearrange themselves behind your back. It was impossible to be in control, a perfect city for letting go. We stayed in a tiny apartment with peeling shutters and floors that sloped slightly toward the canal. The woman who rented it to us spoke only Italian and wore perfume that lingered long after she left. There was a sense of waiting in that apartment, not for anything specific, just for something to end or begin. We barely left it for the first 2 days. Slept in. Ate fruit from the market. Sat on the windowsill drinking red wine too early in the day. Watched gondolas drift by like lazy ghosts. Nina read aloud from an old book she found on the shelf. I wrote postcards I never planned to send. On the 3rd day, we went walking. The city was quieter than Florence, softer, somehow. We wandered with no direction, letting the streets take us. Past churches older than memory, past children kicking soccer balls against marble walls, past laundry hanging above us like flags from invisible countries. We found a courtyard no bigger than a living room, with a single tree in its center. The bark was smooth from centuries of hands. Nina sat on the bench and lit a cigarette. "Do you think we're running away?" she asked. I thought about it. I think we already ran. This, I gestured to the sky, the bricks, the world, this is what happens after. She smiled. "So we survived." "Yes. We did." That night, we didn't speak much. We lay in the narrow bed, windows open, mosquitoes flirting with the curtain. I watched the shadows move on the ceiling. Her hand found mine under the blanket, not urgent, just there. "I don't want to go back," I whispered. "Then don't. It's not that easy." "Sure it is," she said. "You just stay. Stay." The word echoed like a spell. The next morning, I woke to the sound of church bells and her voice on the phone. She was speaking Italian, low and quick. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the rhythm, something final. When she hung up, she looked older. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes didn't follow. "What was that?" "My daughter," she said. "She wants to know if I'll be home for her wedding." I forgot she even told me the date. A silence opened between us. "Will you go?" I asked. She looked at me like I was the one asking the wrong question. Later, we sat by the water eating gelato, watching a boy chase pigeons across a square. "You think they ever figure it out?" she asked suddenly. "Who?" "The men. The ones we leave. Do they ever realize they made us disappear piece by piece?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That evening, I wrote to my son. "I'm not sure when I'm coming home. I'm safe. I'm happy. That's all you need to know. I love you." I didn't sign it, Mom. Just my name. Venice was beginning to feel familiar, but I knew that was the moment to leave. Not because I missed home, but because I didn't need to chase something anymore. Nina stood at the dock in the morning light, her suitcase by her feet. "So," she said. "Split up here?" I nodded. "It feels like the right kind of ending." She stepped forward and kissed me, slow, soft, nothing romantic, everything important. "Promise me you won't disappear again," she said. I promised to keep appearing. She smiled at that. Then turned and walked toward her boat, already waving at the driver. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because sadness wasn't shameful anymore. It just was. The messenger sat unread in my inbox for 2 days. Nina said nothing about her daughter's wedding, and I didn't ask. Venice was already a memory and a lesson. Endings don't hurt when they're chosen. I awoke on my 5th morning in Venice to silence bubbling within me, not all around me. I felt awake in a way I hadn't in years, a quiet certainty in my chest that this trip, this time alone, was more than a gesture. It was a turning point. I packed a small duffel, my navy blue dress, my worn walking shoes, a scarf. Just like Florence. But this time, not for escape. For arrival. I left Venice on a mid-morning vaporetto, crossing the Grand Canal one last time. The water shifted beneath me, reflections broke and reformed. I felt as though I was leaving less of myself behind than picking up the pieces I had forgotten. I decided next on Rome. Not for the Colosseum or Vatican. Not yet. I just followed a whim, letting maps gather dust. We arrived in Rome at midday. The train station was as chaotic as anyone promised, people rushing, bells ringing, announcements in unfamiliar tongues. I didn't care. Everything I had left behind felt small. I had nothing to prove here. Only myself to rediscover. Nina and I parted ways with another quiet glance. She was still deciding whether to return home for the wedding or stay away. I hugged her firmly, feeling the strength in both of us. "Keep appearing," I whispered. "I will," she said. In Rome, I walked. Everywhere. Piazza Navona, hidden lanes behind Pantheon, gardens under pine trees. I drank espresso in a quiet alleyway where no guidebook reached. I wrote postcards to no one. I whispered the words "I belong" whenever my feet paused. I didn't call my son. I still puttered at my phone, swiped through photos of home, the family group chat messages peppered with blue hearts and selfies from Santorini. But I didn't reply. Not yet. One afternoon, I sat by the Tiber, reading from my passport. I closed the photo of myself, older, softer, but unbroken. I realized, no one can erase you unless you let them. That evening, I climbed the stairs to the Gianicolo terrace. The city stretched golden beneath me, ancient stones draped in dusk. I stood rooted there until the sun dropped and fired the sky red. A change happened inside. A turning point no one else would mark. I was not coming home because someone missed me. I was coming home because I had missed myself. I boarded a plane to Athens 3 days later. Simple flight this time. Daytime. I slept poorly, nerves rattling through my bones. When the wheels touched down, it wasn't fear that struck me, it was curiosity. Would they greet me with outrage? Indifference? I walked into the house as quietly as I would enter a museum. The front door opened. Katie, my daughter-in-law, stood there with her keys in hand, surprise frozen on her face. "Eleanor," she said simply. No scolding. No drama. Just her. She stepped aside with that mild expression of someone who's been told the wrong story and is willing to hear it again. I walked past her into the home that used to define me so completely. Inside, the house smelled familiar: laundry, old leather chair, the scent of rosemary from my garden. The fern in the corner drooped, its soil dry. I gently watered it. My presence was not loud. I didn't demand. I just was. Katie appeared in the doorway later with a cup of tea. "Tell me," she said. "Everything." I told her. Every quiet heartbreak, every overlooked birthday, the moment I realized they never intended to invite me. I told her about the postcards I never mailed, the laughter with Nina, the silence I used as armor and now as choice. She listened. I saw in her eyes that she understood, maybe for the first time, that love can carry direction, but duty isn't the same as devotion. 2 weeks passed. No one asked where I had been. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not even my grandson. They welcomed me with politeness. Politeness is colder than silence. It means they're willing to forget, not forgive. But I didn't ask for forgiveness. I hadn't done anything wrong. I moved into the guest room. It used to be the office. A fold-out bed, one small wardrobe, a dusty bookshelf that held law textbooks from my son's university days. I didn't complain. I claimed it like a monk claims a cell, not out of punishment, but peace. Each morning I made coffee before anyone else woke. I walked the garden barefoot. I sat with my journal in the sun and wrote no letters. Just sentences like, "I do not vanish. I lived in Venice. My hands still remember Florence Stone. They do not get to write my name in parentheses." The first night, they invited me to dinner. I sat quietly, letting the conversation flow around me. The wedding was in a week. Katie mentioned it casually, like one might mention a dentist appointment. "We'll be flying out Thursday," she said. "To Santorini, the island I had once dreamed of visiting." I had hinted, years ago, that I would love to go someday. The hint went ignored. Like most of me. Now they were going, for their daughter's wedding. My granddaughter. The one who once called me her lighthouse. They hadn't asked if I wanted to come. Still hadn't. I waited. Not out of hope, but to see if they'd offer. By Wednesday, no ticket appeared. No mention. Only suitcase zippers, printed itineraries, and a last-minute list taped to the fridge. Dog food. Window plants. Garbage bins. They expected me to stay. Like the housekeeper. Like the backup generator. Like a grandmother-shaped shadow. So I packed. But not for Santorini. I didn't leave a note this time. They would learn the way you learn anything real, by absence. I traveled to Delphi. A place where the ancients went to hear truths and riddles. Where the oracle sat in her stone seat and people crossed continents to ask one question: what should I do? No one asks that anymore. They Google it. But I went. Not for answers, but to listen. I arrived in the late afternoon. The mountains leaned close. The sun painted the stones red. I walked alone among ruins, temples, columns, crumbled staircases leading nowhere. I whispered to the wind. They chose not to see me. And the wind answered. Then look harder at yourself. I stayed in a small guest house. My room had a view of the valley. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. In the morning, I met a woman at breakfast. Her name was Clara. She was French, mid-60s, traveling alone. She had left her husband after 39 years of marriage. He thought I wouldn't, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. He thought I was too loyal to myself to ever leave him. We talked for hours. Not like strangers, but like survivors. Women who chose themselves, even if too late. Or just in time. That afternoon, I wrote a letter to my granddaughter. Not to ask why I wasn't invited. Just to say, I saw you once dancing in the kitchen at age 5, wearing my scarf as a cape. You said I was your favorite grown-up. If I no longer am, I understand. But I hope you dance like that still. I'm not angry. I just finally realized I don't want to beg for a chair at a table I built. I hope your wedding is full of joy. If you ever need to find me, I'll be somewhere writing my name in stone. I didn't mail it. I kept it in my journal. Some things aren't for them to read. I moved into a rented flat in Nafplio. By the sea. The landlord didn't ask many questions. I paid in cash. It had a small kitchen, a window that faced the ocean, and a cat who visited each morning like clockwork. I started sketching again. Faces from cafes. Clouds over water. Once, I drew myself, not as I was, but as I wanted to be remembered. Barefoot. Laughing. Alive. No one from home wrote. So I didn't write back. One evening, Clara visited. We had wine on the balcony. I told her the full story: Florence, Venice, Rome, the wedding I wouldn't attend. She raised her glass. To your absence. The loudest thing you've ever said. I smiled. And drank to that. One night, a message came. My son. Only 2 words: are you okay? I didn't answer. Because that question is not for someone who's already disappeared. It's for the asker's guilt, not the vanisher's peace. Months passed. Then a year. Then 2. I sent postcards occasionally. Not of where I was, but of where I might be. One from Istanbul. One from Marseille. One from Kiev. Each only said, still here. I am no longer Eleanor, the grandmother in the background. I am Eleanor, who left. Who went. Who stayed gone. Who chose not to shrink to fit their story. Life is not a neat circle where you return exactly where you started. It is more like a line, sometimes straight, sometimes winding, that you draw yourself, step by step, choice by choice. Eleanor's journey is not just hers, it is the story of anyone who has ever felt invisible in the places they called home. It is a story about rediscovering oneself, even when the people you love do not see the value in your presence. She left not to run away but to find peace. She left to create a life where she could be seen and heard, not as a shadow, but as a full, vibrant self. If her story touched you, if you see a bit of yourself in Eleanor's footsteps, know this: you are not alone. You have the power to write your own line. Thank you for traveling this path with me. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of courage, rediscovery, and quiet strength, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. There, we share tales that don't always make the headlines, voices that whisper in the silence, and journeys that remind us that every ending is just the beginning of something new. Join our community. Share your story. Let's walk these lines together. Because every voice deserves to be heard, and every story deserves to be told. Subscribe now, and let's keep this conversation alive.